Friend, have you ever had one of those mornings where you're irritated before your feet even hit the floor? It's just a regular old day, nothing major has happened, nobody's done anything really wrong. There is not some huge crisis waiting for you, and yet somehow every little thing feels bigger than it should. Then the coffee spills, you can't find your keys, your belt loop catches on the door handle, or your partner asks a completely innocent question, and suddenly you feel your patience evaporate into thin air. Let's talk about what's going on there. Hello, and welcome to Torches, Yoga and Mindfulness. I'm Lauren, and I'll be your coach. If you're curious about mindfulness, healing, and practical habits that actually work, you're in the right place because here we focus on simple but powerful practices grounded in ancient wisdom and modern science to care for both our mind and body. So go ahead, hit the like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. So, if you've ever had a morning like that, when we get frustrated with anything happening, and then there's this layer of confusion because we can't even logically say it's this one thing that's bothering me. And from the outside, it just looks like we're reacting to something small, overreacting. But from the inside, it often feels much bigger than that. Maybe you tell yourself, I'm just not a morning person, or I need my coffee first. But what if the actual problem isn't mornings? What if the mornings are simply the moment we finally notice everything we've been carrying? Last week, we were talking about clearing the mental clutter, the thoughts, the worries, the unfinished decisions, and constant mental tabs that quietly consume our attention. But clutter doesn't just exist in our minds. Sometimes it accumulates in our nervous system. It builds up in our bodies and collects like puddles in our emotions. Often we don't realize how much has accumulated until something small bumps into us and everything suddenly feels heavier than it should. So that's what I want to talk about today. What happens when our nervous system becomes overcrowded, and of course, how we can spot it, because usually the symptoms don't just come on like a headache and we just know what to do and what's going on. It sneaks up on us, like sometimes waking up angry, reactive, impatient, or overwhelmed. And of course, I have some mindful living practices we can lean on when we notice it happening. One thing I have learned over the years in my own experiences and seeing some others go through something similar is that we tend to blame the final straw. We focus all our energy and frustration on the thing that happened right before we got upset or right before we lost our cool. Like, I've been there in my kitchen cussing my coffee cup for being so slippery, or yelling at a driver that cut me off and blame them for making me miss the light. Or I start interrogating my husband to see if he touched my keys last because I can't find them. We take it out on whatever the unexpected interruption was. But the truth is, most of us don't completely lose our patience because of one small inconvenience. What we're often reacting to is the accumulation. It's the low grade stress that has quietly been wearing away at us for weeks. It's the difficult conversation that we brushed off and tried to act like it didn't bother us. It's the constant exhaustion we push through, the mounting work, personal, and family responsibilities. It's the pressure we've adapted to so well that we've stopped noticing that it's there. Or maybe we do know it's there, but we don't acknowledge that that's not the only way that we can live. Most of us become so skilled at functioning while overwhelmed, we actually forget that we are overwhelmed. We just keep checking things off the list, showing up, and doing what needs to be done next. And because we're still functioning, we assume we're fine. But functioning doesn't always mean flourishing. Sometimes we're operating with a nervous system that's been running near capacity for quite a while. And then one morning, our emotional reserve account is sitting at about 12 cents, and suddenly the smallest thing feels catastrophic. So this is where a little bit of science can help to be helpful to understand what's really going on, because we're not broken, we're just human. On the neuroscience side, in our brain, when anger is triggered, things narrow, and it's not just our focus, but our options in processing narrows. The amygdala fires off, and the PFC, our prefrontal cortex, the center for our emotional regulation and problem solving, it goes completely offline. And in this state, we lose access to our creativity that can help us solve problems. And now we only focus on what's wrong. And then we have to consider that our nervous systems are constantly taking in information. They're monitoring our environment, processing emotions, managing stress, regulating energy, and helping us to respond to whatever life puts in front of us. The challenge is that our nervous systems don't necessarily just get a clean reset every night when we go to sleep. If we've had a poor night's sleep, or our emotional regulation tends to suffer then. If we've been under chronic stress, stress hormones don't magically disappear because the calendar changed to a new day. If we've been suppressing emotions, avoiding difficult conversations, or carrying unresolved worries, those experiences can continue to influence us beneath the surface. Then we add the modern life on top of all that: notifications, noise, schedules, screens, constant stimulation and consumption, responsibilities, 30,000 decisions a day. And you may think, I'm exaggerating on that last one, but I am not. Studies show that the average American adult makes 35,000 decisions each day. Now, none of these things we're carrying or doing may be a major thing. They stack up. Imagine that every stressor adds a drop of water. A difficult conversation, a drop of water. That needy coworker, a drop of water. Electric bill came, 5 drops of water. Even feeling disconnected from ourselves, a drop of water. None of these things necessarily overwhelm us by themselves, but eventually the bucket starts to get full all the way to the top. Then one more drop of water drips in. And because that drop happened to be right before the overflow, we assume it caused everything. But the reality is that the bucket was already full. That final drop was simply the thing that made the accumulation visible. And I think that's an important perspective because it changes our question from why am I so angry to what else is going on here? And that question carries a lot more curiosity and a lot less judgment. As we sit with that idea for a minute, I want to invite you into a moment of reflection. You don't need to solve or fix anything, but just notice. What have you been carrying lately? What responsibility feels heavier now than it did maybe a few months ago? What have you been tolerating? What keeps showing up in the background of your mind? What emotion have you been trying to move past without actually acknowledging it? And what part of you has been asking for attention while you've been busy taking care of everything else? Those are just some things to consider, and I will, of course, put these in the description below so you can come back to them at the end of this if you want with your journal. But sometimes these questions reveal something surprising. Sometimes they reveal something we've known all along but haven't wanted to admit. And sometimes they simply remind us that we're human, not machines. They remind us there are limits to how much we can carry before we need rest, support, space, or care. So, what do we do when we notice ourselves becoming reactive? How do we respond when we can feel that fuse getting shorter? I got you. The first practice I have for you is incredibly simple. Before we start telling ourselves a story, we name the experience. Our brains want to jump in straight into building a narrative, and usually with anger and frustration. It's a story that puts us in the victim seat. The brain starts in like everything is going wrong, nothing ever goes right, nobody understands me, or this whole day is a disaster. But building this narrative takes away our power to make any choices or change. And remember, your words have power, not in the speaking incantations under the moonlight Hollywood version, but our brains have a process called confirmation bias. That means they will literally filter out of our awareness and memory anything that contradicts our current beliefs. And they will only seek out evidence that supports our current belief. So if we believe we are all alone or incapable, that's the only experiences our brain will let in. So instead of going down that path, when we notice the reactivity, we name what's actually here. Maybe I spilled the coffee because I was overwhelmed, not paying attention, and already planning what I'll do when I get into work. Maybe we're disappointed, exhausted, or carrying more than we realized. Naming the experience helps us to reconnect with reality. It creates a little space between what we're feeling and the stories our minds want to build around it. Okay, the second practice is something I call a 60-second check in. Now, I practice this myself every day and encourage anyone to make a quick self check in part of your daily routine. I like to do mine in the morning when I'm getting ready for the day, but it comes in especially helpful when we are having these heavy moments like anger or frustration, when we can't pinpoint one real reason. So, whenever we notice the reactivity, we ask three simple questions: what am I feeling? What do I need? And what has my attention right now? These simple questions help us to recognize what's really going on. Like for me, come about 6:30 in the evening and my patience is razor thin and I start getting snappy. For a long time, I would have told myself I was irritated or in a bad mood. But if I stop and do this check-in, I usually discover I'm not actually angry. It's hanger. My blood sugar has dropped and my body is trying to get my attention. And that's the beauty of this practice. It helps us sort out whether we're dealing with exhaustion, loneliness, overstimulation, grief, stress, or something as simple as needing to eat. Because anger is sometimes the one holding the megaphone, but the deeper experience is often something else. And every time we pause and listen, we are sending an important message to ourselves. We're telling our nervous system, I'm paying attention, I'm willing to listen, and you don't have to keep shouting just to be heard. Over time, this creates a sense of self trust. We begin to trust that when our minds, our bodies signal that something needs attention, we'll notice and we'll respond. We'll take care of ourselves. And that self trust can become incredibly grounding, not because it guarantees life will be easy, but because we develop confidence in our ability to meet ourselves with awareness and care in whatever the day happens to bring. All right, the third practice today involves changing your environment for just a moment. Because sometimes the nervous system doesn't need more thinking, but just a reset. Maybe that's stepping outside, feeling the sun on your skin, taking a few slow, deep, fresh breaths of air, drinking a glass of water, putting your phone down for 10 minutes, and maybe sitting in silence instead of immediately filling every moment with more input. These small resets can be surprisingly powerful, and they work because many of the things contributing to our overload are small too. Tiny accumulations respond really well to tiny acts of care. And lastly, friend, I think it's important to talk about relationships. When we are overloaded, the people closest to us often experience the overflow, not because we've stopped loving them or that they did anything wrong, but because they're nearby when the bucket gets overfilled. One of the most compassionate things we can do is communicate to them what we're noticing. Instead of assuming everyone else is the problem, we can say, hey, I'm feeling overloaded today, or I'm struggling, or I don't think my mood is about you, or just in any way let them know, hey, I just need a few minutes to reset. Those simple statements can prevent a difficult moment from becoming an unnecessary conflict. They allow us to take responsibility for our experience without carrying shame about it. All right, friend, as we close out today, I want to come back to our theme for this month: clearing the static. Sometimes the static exists in our thoughts, our schedules, and sometimes it's in the quiet accumulation happening inside our nervous system. If you've been feeling more reactive lately, more impatient, more emotional, or more easily overwhelmed, I hope you'll resist the urge to judge yourself and instead get curious. Ask yourself what you've been carrying, what needs your attention, and what has quietly become too heavy. Because sometimes anger isn't the problem, it's the signal. It's the nervous system's way of waving a little red flag saying, we've been carrying a lot now for a while. And when we can meet that signal with awareness instead of criticism, something begins to soften. Not because we fix everything or that life suddenly became easy, but because we stopped fighting the message long enough to hear what it's trying to tell us. And that awareness is often the first step toward creating a little more space, a little more clarity, a little less static in our lives. Friend, thank you so much for sharing a piece of your day with me. Stay present, stay kind to yourself, and I will see you soon.